So my last live stream turned out to be a disaster because it was harassed by someone who decided to bully my channel. So I'll make another attempt at helping people. My channel doesn't have puppies and clowns and kittens and balloons, and it doesn't fit into the YouTube narrative, of pandering to the simple minded. If you come to my channel, I want to help people and I want to think about things, you know. So if you're playing your video games in mommy and daddy's basement, just uh go back to playing your video game. But if you want to learn something that'll possibly help you, help somebody else, then stick around, check it out, see if we can help each other. I'm responding to a video that Kevin posted. He's a good guy, he's got a good channel. He and his partner, they travel all around, pretty much a straight shooter. But I saw some things on his last post about a guy who tried to get automotive credit and was turned down 3 times. And I worked for a couple of excellent car dealerships. One was a Chrysler Plymouth dealership, and one was a Dodge dealership. And we never had to cheat anybody. All of that is just pretty much made up to a degree, and I'll explain why. And the reason being is that credit isn't something that's automatically given out. When you go to buy a car, resume to a banking manager, and there are several different types of restrictions on credit that make a vast difference in how things are going to turn out for you. For example, there are some banks that will not finance a V8 automobile, that type of thing. There are some banks that won't finance a specialty car. So if you're a young person and you want to get a Hellcat, for example, when I was young, I wanted to buy a Camaro, and I called my insurance lady at Geico, and I said, I'm getting ready to buy a Camaro. And she said, no, you're not. I said, what do you mean I'm not? She said, the insurance will cost you as much as the car payment. She said, you're going to buy a Ford Galaxie 500 or an LTD or a Chevy Impala 4-door, something like that, would be the cheapest car for you to buy as a young person. And so this particular car I bought was a Ford Galaxie 500 4-door with the Police Interceptor motor, was a good thing about it. And I always hated working in a car dealership and the thought of selling used cars. I never thought they were a particularly good value for the money. And the old adage that you're buying somebody else's problem because the other person has traded the car in for a reason. My Galaxie that I bought, the whole right rear of it was a Bondo. And it was one of those things where I hit a bump one day and the Bondo separated from the metal. And then it was quite apparent that the car had been in a bad wreck, and they slapped it together and they sold it to a young kid, which was me. Other than that, it was a good car. It was a relatively new car. So my first car, uh, my first car that I spent big money for was a 1962 Dodge Dart, ugliest car that I've ever seen, and it came with uh two specialties. It came with a heater and it came with a cigarette lighter. It didn't have anything else. No seat belts, no air conditioning, no AM FM radio, no defroster, you know, none of that stuff that a modern car has. It was just four wheels, a steering wheel, this massively heavy car with this little teeny 6-cylinder motor under the hood. And it went from 0 to 60 in about a half a minute. And you really had to gauge going onto the highway, because if you pulled in front of a truck, the truck was going to blow his horn, and you literally couldn't get out of the way of the other vehicle. So you had to be very careful pulling on and off the highway. But getting back to my point, there are so many factors when you go to borrow and buy a car. See, the bank is looking at holding a piece of property versus how much risk you present versus how much return they can get on their money. So when you go to look for a car, the first thing you want to do is you want to try and buy the car with the highest resale value and the safest car. So you want to check with an insurance company first. I had a friend who had wanted to spend around $19,000 a few years ago for either a Ford Fusion or a Honda. And having been in the business, I told him, I said, well, the Ford Fusion, when you drive it off the parking lot, is going to go from 19 down to about $11,000, whereas the Honda, when you drive it off the lot, is going to go from 19 down to about 16. And it'll be an easier car to resell, and it'll have a higher resale value. Pretty much you're just leasing the car, even if you buy it, because it's a good bet that you're going to get your money back or a little bit extra with the Honda. Ford Fusion, I thought the transmission was a little bit quirky, that it didn't have 1, 2 and drive. It just had on the dash 2 and drive. So I thought that was a little bit quirky, but again, that's neither here nor there. So when you start out as a young person, pretty much when you go to high school or college, you'll have companies that try and give you a credit card, which you want to try and pay off every month. You want to be very careful about not going overboard with that credit card and getting yourself into trouble. So I never had a co-signer. My parents never offered to co-sign a loan for me. I worked ever since I was 14 years old, worked a full-time job, and there was a TV company in Bethesda, and I went in and I bought the TV set, paid for half of it, and then paid for the other half on time. And then I asked him to give me a letter of credit, a referral. And that's how I started my credit. Also, I had a social security number, when I was 8 or 9 years old, which back then was very unusual. And I had a savings account as a kid, and I had my own business. So when you're trying to get credit, you want to build what's called a credit resume. You don't just want to walk into the car dealership, in your jeans and your torn flannel shirt, smelling bad with the 3-day beard and all of that, because the manager is going to look at you, and regardless of what anybody says now about profiling, blah, blah, the manager is going to look at you, and in his mind, he's going to try and assess what level of risk you are as far as giving a loan and then having to repo the car and getting a pile of junk back that they're going to have to turn around and sell to somebody else, if you've damaged it or scratched it up or let the motor run out of oil, that type of thing. So, again, if you're a young person, you want to start out with the transcript of your grades. Credit companies look at whether you're, hey, Colleen, how are you doing? Credit companies look at whether you're a solid citizen or not. So you start right from the get-go, and you get your transcripts from school. If you have good grades in school, that will literally help your credit outlook. So then, when you want to go and apply for credit with the car company, you want to fill that form out as neatly and completely as possible. If you've made a mistake, don't scratch it out. Ask for another form and fill it out carefully and take your time. Fill it out completely. And when you give references for people, call the people on the phone and ask them, tell them, look, I thought about giving you as a reference, a personal reference. Is that okay? That way, when the bank tries to call them, the people will know not to hang up on the call. That's very important also. But like I said, when you pick a car out, you want to pick out a car that's going to have the highest safety and the highest resale value that you can. Because if you pick out some weird little piece of crap, the bank is going to say to themselves, we don't want to take the risk of holding a loan against this little pile of junk that'll be hard to resell and won't be worth anything in a couple of years. And the other thing about it, when you buy a car, particularly a used car, one of the worst things that people do to try and see if the car is any good, they get it in and they start the motor up and then they rev it. They rev that motor as hard as they can to see if the motor is going to stand up or whether it's going to blow up or something like that. That's the worst thing that you can do to an automobile, is over rev a motor with no load on it. And particularly if you're serious about buying that car. I went through a couple of test drives where people abused the car on the test drive, and I had the person turn the car off, let me drive back to the dealership. I said, you're not serious about buying this car because you're abusing the car right now. So we're wasting your time, we're wasting my time. Company didn't like it, but then I told the company, look, I'm representing your best interest and my best interest, everybody's best interest for the next person that's going to try and buy that car, and that's called being a fiduciary. I literally went on a test drive with a man who wanted to buy a Jeep Cherokee, and it was freezing cold out, and he decided to hand shift the car. And Jeep has a warning light that comes on when you're over revving the motor. I've never seen it before this time, but the car was literally telling the man that he was over revving a cold motor and going beyond the shift points, that were recommended by the car manufacturer. So he was tearing the car up, in a manner of speaking. So I had him pull over and stop. He was offended. I apologized. I said, obviously, you're not serious about buying the car. When you go to buy a used car, you start when the engine is dead cold. You open up the hood, you take the oil filler cap off of the motor. You look under the cap. If it's clean, you're good to go. If it's got water or oil or gray oil, you have a problem with the motor. You go to the water filler, either the radiator or the plastic bottle. Open that up. You look for oil in the water. If there's oil in the water, you have a problem. Then you go to the dipstick. This is while the motor's cold. You pull the dipstick and you check if the oil's clean. Hey, Justin. You pull the dipstick and you see if the oil's clean or not, or whether it's too high up on the dipstick. That can mean that the water, hey, Hungry, that can mean that the water is getting into the oil system. So you do that before you even start the car up. Now, an automatic transmission is a harder thing to troubleshoot, because most of them now are sealed. They don't even have a dipstick where you can pull the dipstick and smell the transmission fluid to see if it's burned. So that's something where you're really rolling the dice on a used car. Then the next thing you want to do, you want to start the car up and you go around back while it's still cold. You take a napkin and you put it over the exhaust pipe. And if it has a circle and a clean spot, you're okay. If it has a circle with a lot of soot or a lot of blue oily goo that's coming out of the exhaust pipe, you have a problem with the motor. So the motor's worn or has some other problem with it. And then the other thing that you should do is you take a magnet and you tap it along the body. And if the magnet doesn't hold, it means that the car's been wrecked and the car's been filled in with body filler. Any car that comes up on a report as having been wrecked is going to be a problem getting financed. So when this person was turned down, they don't know whether they were turned down on their credit or they were turned down because of the car they were trying to buy. That's very important to find out. Now, as for me and the way that I am, my thing is to go to AutoZone and buy a car dock. They're $50 and they plug into the computer port on the car that you want to buy. So you flip the little access thing down and you plug it in, and then you read to see if that car has got any codes, because the car dealership can clear those codes, park that car, and then sell it to you before the codes pop back up. So when the car is starting to warm up, you want to gently pull it down into first gear, back to neutral, put it into reverse, back to neutral. Pull it down into drive, back to neutral. Take your time, do it slowly, and listen for any sounds that the transmission is making. Like Chryslers will make a brrrr, Ford will make a clunk. Once a Ford gets over like 60 or 70,000, the transmission will start to get slow and slip and clunk into gear. But the weird thing about a Ford is that transmission won't fail for a very long time, but it will start to slip and slowly go into gear over time, about 60 or 70,000. Whether you have overhead timing chain car, or whether you have a push rod car. And the thing with an engine, for example, like a Chrysler 2.7 V6, hey 420, a Chrysler 2.7 has the water pump on the inside of the car, and they use the water pump as a pulley for the timing chain to go around. It makes the engine cheaper for the car company to produce, and it makes the engine lighter, and it makes the engine with less parts, and it makes the engine be able to rev higher than a pushrod engine can, because you have the push rods and the lifters and everything are going up and down. That's the most inefficient thing about a piston engine, is that the piston goes up, it stops, and it goes down and stops. Every time it does that, there's heat generated and energy lost. That's why a piston engine is pretty much the most inefficient engine ever built. But see, it's old school and they've been doing it forever. So that's why they keep making them. If they wanted to make a really efficient car, they would make a turbine electric hybrid, a turbine just as small as that, driving an alternator, driving the electric motors at the wheels. You would have a car, you wouldn't have to worry about charging it. You know, you could go for hundreds and hundreds of miles as the little turbine charged the battery pack up and drove the electric motors. They don't build that car on purpose, because in the future they want to limit how far you can drive, where you can go, when you can go, because even now states like California are limiting when you can charge your electric car up. So again, my channel is about trying to help people. Hey Cheeks, how you doing? My channel is about trying to help people. And you want to get everything in a row and get a folder ready, so that when it turns out that you want credit, you'll have everything. And like I said, you make a credit resume. And yeah, you're welcome. You make a credit resume so that you have all of your information there, your job information, your school. Like I said, you want a transcript of your grades. Credit managers take that into consideration, whether you were a good student, whether you went to college. Like I said, legally, they're not allowed to profile, but everybody does in their mind. And when you go from yourself to a bank, it's very difficult to get credit. What you need to do is you need to go from yourself to a credit manager and let the credit manager talk to the other credit manager that he has a good relationship with, and you're more able to get your credit. So You have your school transcripts, you have your job application transcripts. They want to know how steady you are, how much your employer values you. They're going to call your employer. You know, they want to know if you have a stable home life, whether you rent your house or whether you've bought it, who you live with. All of this stuff is part of your credit resume. And like I said, it's better if you can turn in a sheet that is typed versus a handwritten sheet. Now, when a bank manager is giving out credit, he only has a certain amount of money to lend. They don't tell you all of this when you're buying a car. So, in any case, that manager is going to look at the deals that are being presented to him throughout the day. He's going to look at the car brand, the credit manager from the other car dealership, and he's going to use that relationship to figure out which credit deal he's going to buy. Credit deals are bought. They're not just automatically given out because, like I said, there's only a certain amount of money in the pool. And the other thing is the day that you go to buy the car is very important. If you go on a weekend when everything is closed down, you're going to have to wait anyway to find out whether you're approved for the loan. A weekend is good to look at a car. It's not a good day to buy a car. Monday is not a good day to buy a car. Friday is not a good day to buy a car. Wednesday is the next worst day to buy a car because people are sitting at their desk thinking about the weekend. So your best 2 days to try and go in and buy a car are Tuesday and Thursday are your prime days to go buy a car. If you're seeking credit from your bank, you need to have what's called a buyer's order. You can't just go to your bank and say, look, I saw this real nice Chrysler for $19,000. I need $19,000. And then he's going to push a form in front of you. You're going to have to put the serial number of the car and all of that anyway, because the bank manager is going to run a Carfax on your car to see if it's been wrecked or not. Even new cars get wrecked. New cars can have hail damage. They can have flood damage. They can have parking lot damage. When I went to buy a Lincoln one time, I went to the dealership and the kid who was supposed to bring my car around started it up, run, 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 screeched it up to me. I told the car company, I said, I'm not buying that. I'm not buying that car. After I see your lot boy, and he revs the engine up like that and slams it into gear and screeches the car up to me, and you're not going to say anything to the guy that he's tearing the cars up. He doesn't care. They're out the door, and then you have a whole bunch of problems with the car. I bought a Mercury X100, beautiful, sleek car. And when they were taking the car off of the trailer, the guy hit the brakes. And when he hit the brakes, it tore one of the tires as the car was coming down the ramps. It tore one of the tires. And the tire was all jagged. And when I brought it to the dealer's attention, the dealer said, well, you got to go to Firestone, get that tire replaced. This is a brand new car that I hadn't driven off the lot. They said, well, we're not a tire dealer. We don't have a spare tire for the car. You got to take this car and take it up to Firestone, get a new tire. And then when I took it up to Firestone, they didn't know how to take the special wheel off and they damaged the wheel. And I learned from a boss that I worked for as a kid. He said, Will, if something starts out bad, it's going to end bad. So if it starts out bad, cut it off right there. We went to a restaurant and we couldn't get waited on, and the restaurant wasn't very busy. And so the boss told me, he said, come on, get up, we're leaving. And I said, well, the people apologized about the wait. He said, yeah, place isn't busy, something's going on. They're understaffed, or, we don't want to make their problem our problem. Let's go. That was a very important lesson that he taught me. So when you go to repair your credit, if you go to one of those places that's a credit repair company, what you're unknowingly doing is you're going to a credit collection agency. You're literally taking yourself to the collection agency, giving them all of your information, your address, your phone number, everything. And then don't go along with their plan to repair the credit. They're going to turn you in, and you're going to get, thank you, bud. Man, Raj just dropped off my lunch. God bless him. You're going to get hassled in every kind of way. So what you do to repair your own credit, there are 3 credit companies, Experian, and 2 others. I'm older than God, so forgive me. This is too much information to come out at one time, but I'm trying. So you get a credit report, and let's say you have something you didn't know about, and they claimed on the report that you owe this company $90, a cheap credit fix. So you go to that company and you tell them, I want to pay this, or I want to dispute it. Like when, for example, Consumer Cellular, I owed them $45 and I wanted to cancel. And by the time they added this charge, an advance monthly fee, and phone charge and all, they wanted $286 to cancel their crummy service. And they literally took one commercial off that was very racist. Now here you have 2 old people, and they want to tell everybody how wonderful Consumer Cellular is. So what better way do they do it? If you watch the commercial, they get into a canoe and they paddle over to this guy who's minding his business fishing to tell him how wonderful Consumer Cellular is. And I'm watching the commercial. I'm like, who wrote this? Then this white couple goes into a black barber shop, and they say to the African-American barber who's cutting hair, well, we got this crappy Consumer Cellular flip phone because we don't know how to use a smartphone. And the barber, who's an actor, still looks at him like, man, everybody knows how to use a smartphone. I got a smartphone. But of course, they go to the African-American guy and they insinuate that he's not smart enough to use a smartphone. So they're trying to push this crappy, he's looking at him. It was priceless. They took the commercial down, So I get this nasty note from Consumer Cellular that I went over my plan by 1 gig. I was a customer for a year and a half, and I always was prompt pay, and I didn't use all of my service. I didn't use all of it, But the 1 month that I went over, I fell asleep, and I left the phone on this YouTube site that was like prayers for sleeping or something. And it used up a whole bunch of my data points. And I got to stay, the phone wouldn't work. I called the lady up and I said, my phone's not working. It's a brick. She said, yeah, you're over your plan. It's cut off. And if you do it again, you'll get your service canceled. I said, well, A, your company is more expensive. And B, you only give 20 gigs of service when everybody else is given 30. And the girl on the phone, who was very nasty, by the way, she told me that she herself didn't use consumer cellular service, even though she worked for them. But in any case, they put a hit on my credit. We've been back and forth and back and forth. I'm like $186 for the privilege. In any case, fam, what you do in that case is you try and negotiate with the person who put the hurt on your credit score. And if you can pay the $90 that you really owe, you make arrangements to pay it, and then you ask them to re-report that. Okay? So that takes care of your cheapest credit strike against you. Now, for things like with consumer cellular, where they send it to collections on me, I make an offer again to the collection agency to settle for $45. Then that will show up on my credit report, paid but not as promised. So that's almost as bad as a default. The third thing is that if you know that you're getting ready to default on your car payment, you call the bank up, you call the credit agency up, and you say, look, I lost my job, whatever. I have to turn the car in. That's called a voluntary repossession, so that credit company knows when they get that car back, it'll be in a good enough condition for them to try and resell it to somebody else. So it's always better, if you're having credit problems, to call and try and reschedule your credit. I always bought a contract and car companies don't want you to know this. Most credit arrangements buying a car will have 2 times that you can default on your payment. And what I mean to say is, you call the credit company up, and instead of paying the $700 payment, and you buy a 1-month extension, now that $70 is lost, and it doesn't buy that 1 month. You still have to pay the $700, which gets put on the end of your loan, but it keeps you in your car. It keeps you from defaulting on your credit, and it's well worth the $70 extra charge. And usually they'll have 2 of them that you can purchase. So that's very important to find out when you're signing something. Now, the Chevy dealership in Laurel, Maryland did a very dirty thing to me, and it's totally illegal. What they did when I bought my Chevy Cavalier, which I paid $31,000 for, a 2004 Chevy Cavalier from Fox Chevy. It wasn't even one of the high dollar Cavaliers. It had the crappy plastic hubcaps and all. What they did was they put a buyer's order on top of another buyer's order, okay? And so when I was signing it, I thought that it was going through a carbon copy, and they would give me a carbon copy. Now, legally, They had to give me both copies, which they did. I didn't look at it at the time. They fold it up for you while they're bullshitting about something else. They put it in your starter envelope, send you on your way, and you don't realize that you've signed a second form agreeing to pay a whole lot more for that automobile. So when you go to sign your paperwork, you make sure that you use a blue pen so that you can prove that you signed that particular piece of paper and that it's not a carbon copy that you're not tricked into. I learned that the hard way. Otherwise, they're going to call you and they're going to ask for the car back if you don't agree to pay the trumped up BS charges that they tricked you into. And that dealership, when I paid the car off, $31,000 for Chevy Cavalier, with crank windows, plastic hubcaps. I was like, you all got me one time, but you're not getting me again. And I would never do that to a customer, never did that when I worked for Chrysler. Chrysler was a wonderful company. And if you had good sales, you got a steak, potato. Hey, Katrina, you got a steak, potato, drink, coffee, dessert. If you had crappy sales and you were at a Chrysler dinner, you got beanie weenies or you got macaroni and cheese. Speaking of macaroni and cheese, mi mano derecha just dropped off my dinner or lunch. So I got to go. I hope that this video helps some of you, many of you. I've kept my fiduciary situation where I worked for a car dealership. I was honest. I was honest with the customer. I was honest with the bank. I was honest with the car dealership. What I mean to say is, for example, when I sold cars, a woman came in and she wanted to use her student loan money. She wanted to use her student loan money to buy a car. And I told her very apologetically, I said, ma'am, I can't legally take that student loan money and buy a car with it for you because that's not where the money was intended. And man, she was hot. And I explained to her about being a fiduciary and that if I let the car out and everybody found out about it, the dealer could get sued. The credit company would take the car back anyway. I'd get back a repoed piece of junk. All of those things turn into a can of worms. Always better to deal honestly. Chrysler Plymouth was marvelous. And I had a fun time doing it. And I always did it with a clear conscience. Not everybody is a crook, but you have to be smart. And if you don't know how to buy a car and all of the ins and outs, you're spending so much money. Get somebody from a car dealership or a bank who's a friend to go with you, somebody who knows about this stuff so that you don't get ripped off or overspend. Pop out.